Webster, and I'm the Digital Solutions Manager here at Cengage. So before we get started today, we just want to make sure that you're all familiar with the tool that we're using and that you can make the best of today's webinar. So in the main field right now, you can see a slide with Anna's photo, Anna my photo on there. And in that field, we're going to use some slides during the webinar today. We're also going to use it for poll questions. So we're going to keep today quite interactive, try and keep you engaged. So keep an eye out for the poll questions appearing, because we'd like you to answer them when they appear. Directly below that, you'll see the chat room. So our chat room today is being moderated by Roxanne, and to make sure that we get the best from the session, we want to try and use the chat room as much as possible as well. So could you just put a hi or a hello into the chat room just so we can see that you guys have picked up on it? Cool, and I can see here we're starting to get answers through, so everybody's picking up on it. Great, and I'm presuming by the fact that you've all just responded to our questions that you can hear us loud and clear today. So if you do have any audio issues, do let us know. But it looks like everybody can hear us at the moment. Last thing to say is that we are recording today's session. So we'll record all of the audio and the video, and the reason for that is we will share it with you after the session. So we have your contact details, we will share it with you. So you can go back through and listen to some of it again if you've missed something, or you can go back through and look in the chat room if there's some information there that you want. So I'm going to hand back over to Anna.
Fab. So also just to mention before we get properly started, there is a certificate of attendance available. So if you would like one of those for attending today's webinar, please just put your name in the chat room and we will get one of those sent out to you along with the recording that Stuart just mentioned. So to get started today, the agenda's up on the screen now, but we're just going to go through a few basic kind of why is student engagement important. We'll then go on to some poll questions and discussion, which is really important, and we really hope you'll use the chat room in that element of the webinar. I'm also going to mention some case studies that Cengage have undertaken, and then obviously we have time if you have any questions, we can answer any of those. So why is student engagement so important? Well, as universities' fees keep rising, students, and in fact their parents as well, are looking to get more value out of a university degree. And often this can be a significant challenge, of course, for lecturers yourselves, because class times are fixed, there's often not many contact hours with students, and therefore students are expected more and more to facilitate their own learning. So it's really important that students are engaged so they can, do their work not only within class, but also be engaged outside of class. So what is student engagement? That's something that's really important to today's webinar. If I were to ask all of you who your most engaged students are, I'm sure you would be able to tell me who they were. However, there's a lot of different interpretations of student engagement, and it may not mean the same thing to one person as it does to someone else. So perhaps student engagement to you is whether students are motivated to learn. So that could be in the form of attending lectures, in the form of participating in class discussions or in seminars, or perhaps about which students have the best grades. Perhaps student engagement to you is not only about engagement with your class in particular, but actually about how students are engaged with the institution as a whole. So there's actually been a lot of research done in this area, which suggests if students are engaged with, for example, institutions' governance, perhaps they do volunteering, perhaps they do student activities outside of the classroom, they're more likely to be engaged within your lessons and within classes as well. Finally, perhaps student engagement to you is actually just about student satisfaction. So in the UK, obviously, we have the National Student Survey, which aims to measure that. So perhaps that's what student engagement is to you. But hopefully, as we go into our first poll question now, we'll find out a bit more about what engagement is for you and the best ways that we can kind of engage students.
So our first poll question is up on the screen now. So as we said, we'd like you to engage with us and join in with the poll question. So what do you feel is the key or keys to student engagement? So this is a multiple choice. You don't have to choose just one answer. You can select as many as you feel are appropriate for you. Also, it's not a definitive list, so if there's something extra you'd like to contribute, please use the chat room to do that, or if you want to add a comment to something that you've selected in the choices from the poll question, do that as well. So we're just going to take a moment to give you a chance to have a read through that list and to select the answer or answers that you feel are appropriate. So I'm just keeping an eye on the screen. Okay, so there's still new people joining the session. Excellent. So yeah, please take that opportunity to vote for the things that you're seeing up on the screen. And see what's going on in the chat room. Okay, so no comments at the moment. So if you could just take a moment, just select one of the options or multiple options that you'd like to vote for. Sorry about the break in audio there. Appeared to be a small technical problem. If you can't hear us, please do let us know. Oh, hello, Cornelius. Just a nice message there in the chat room. Okay, so just a few people still voting. So I think just a few people just joined. So we're going to put the answers to vote on the answers to selections. Okay, so there we can see the answers on the screen. So a real mixture there of answers. So you can see that.
Yeah, so there definitely are a real mixture of answers, and really all of those things are really important for student engagement, which is proven by the fact that all of you have kind of taken different answers to that. So if we just start with, for example, low student staff ratio, that's quite important for ensuring students cultivate closer relationships with their lecturers or their instructors. And it also often means that they have quicker access to feedback, which is really important to engage students. And they're more likely to be involved with their lecture and be more involved in seminars and discussions as a result. Also, there was one about involving students in learning and decision-making processes. So a lot of universities these days actually ask students to test digital solutions or technology, and it's how the students respond determines if a university will actually use that technology. Something else is also peer-assisted learning. So actually Manchester University have something called PASS, which refers to peer-assisted study sessions. So these provide a group learning opportunity which uses the experience of higher level students to help those that are perhaps lower level, so in their first or second year. So these supplement existing lectures or seminars and enables kind of active learning in an informal and friendly environment. So what else do we have? Any comments coming in?
Go to the chat room, so nothing at the moment. I just wanted to revert back to something Anna mentioned there, which was about institutions using students' opinions to make decisions on the kind of software and applications that they're purchasing, those digital solutions, to support students in their learning and also in their general experience at university. And from previous webinars we've done, we've certainly heard from institutions that this is something that they're doing. I just wondered if anybody who was on today had an experience of that, so whether they had student panels that made or contributed to this decision making, and what that experience had been like. So if you are at an institution that has student panels that make decisions on those digital tools that are used to drive student engagement, whether that's on a specific class or whether that's their experience at university as a whole.
And also, actually, most of you have mentioned that regular feedback is really important, and there have been numerous studies on this in research and kind of in education that indicate that feedback is most effective when it's given immediately, as opposed to a few days, a few weeks, or perhaps even a month down the line. Students are less likely to engage with this feedback and therefore less likely to be engaged. So in fact, we did a case study with a lecturer called David Duffy. So he works at Ulster University in Northern Ireland. And he used something that Cengage provided, which is called Applia, and he used this for around 100 students in an introductory economics course. So he found it was really good because he could give weekly problem sets to students and they would get instant feedback. And he found this was a really great way to engage his students. And in fact, the result was that fewer than 10% of students failed when he used this tool, as opposed to 30% before it was used. So it just goes to show how much of an impact regular feedback can have on student engagement and, in fact, student grades.
Cool. So we're not. Oh, I was going to say we're not seeing anything coming up in the chat room, and then I saw somebody was typing, but no further feedback at the moment. Anna, do you want to move on?
Yeah, sure. Let's move on to our second poll question.
Cool. So the next poll question is up on the screen now. So how do you currently engage your students? So again, this is a multiple choice question, so you can select as many choices as you want. And as we said before, please do use the chat room to comment on the areas you've selected, or possibly something we've missed, because this certainly isn't a definitive list. So, lots of people jumping in there and commenting at the moment. And some fairly traditional methods in there, and some more contemporary ways of engaging with students. So just to give a few more people a chance to select their choices, or to add any comments they have on the areas that they've added in there. Cool. So just Roxanne commenting on a few of the things in the question. So you all answering in there. So I think just about everybody has answered who's going to. Just give you another few seconds. And I think that's probably it. Cool. So you can all see the answers, or the data we've just got from that last poll there. So certainly using technology or interactive content such as videos, quizzes, etc. Seems to be the largest choice there, Anna. But people selecting across the range, including other. So if you are a person or people who selected other, maybe you could let us know what it is you're using.
Yeah, definitely let us know what else you might be using. This is just a few options that may be used kind of most regularly to engage students. So I've put blended learning there. So this is being seen more and more as part of a teaching method, so combining kind of traditional teaching methods with using kind of online technology. So we've actually done another case study which used this form of learning with a lecturer called Anne Torres at the National University of Ireland in Galway. So she was teaching a really large foundation marketing course, and it actually had 450 students on it. And she decided to use something called four-letter press, a technology for these students. So she adopted a flipped classroom approach. So students would do work at home, and then they would come to class and take assessments which were worth 25% of the overall mark. And these assessments were unannounced. So students knew they had to turn up to the lesson, and they'd already done their work at home. So actually this had a really big impact on student engagement, which was directly linked to student outcomes. So in 2009, before this technology, the course had 50% pass rates. But actually in 2016, after using this new technology for a few years and flipped learning, the pass rate was 97%. So Anne Torres put this completely down to the engagement of students. So that's definitely a great way to engage students. So what else have we got on there?
So there's a few other pieces. So we had a fair few people selected regular assessment and feedback. And given what we were talking about with the previous question, Anna was talking about the speed at which students receive both their grade, but more importantly, their feedback from that regular assessment. I just wondered if anybody who'd selected that option could maybe comment on how that assessment and feedback is being done, whether it was through tutorials, whether it was some sort of digital tool or another method. So if you selected the regular assessment and feedback, maybe you could comment on what was there. And just to revert back, Anna, to what you were talking about a moment ago with Anne Torres and the idea of the flipped classroom. There was an article in the Times, I believe it was this morning. I'm sure you can view it in the Times online, talking about Northampton University in the UK. And there's an article in the Times saying that they are moving to a flipped classroom across the institution. So I don't have all the details on that, but certainly an article there in a well-recognised national newspaper here in the UK, talking about institutions making broad decisions across the whole institution to move to a flipped model, which could be to drive engagement based upon a webinar we did last week. It could also be about covering all of the course content and the curriculum. Certainly we'd had comments about that before, about the flipped model allowing you to provide or to deliver the course in a more effective way. I can see lots of stuff coming into the chat room, so let's have a quick look at what's there. Okay, so lots coming from Dennis and James, and there. So Dennis just asking how the flipped classroom being used and where students are appropriately prepared. Do students become engaged when we test them? That's a really good question. So Dennis, many unfortunately do only become engaged in assessment. It's a lifelong culture of teaching and testing. I'd be interested, Dennis, I'm not sure where you're from, but reading that certainly echoes the things we've heard in at UK institutions and for UK education as a whole, but maybe you're not based in the UK, so I'd be interested to hear where you're from. But certainly there is a recognised model that we hear more and more about, which I think is politely defined as strategic learners, but is very much around students becoming engaged when they're tested, and whether that's just a practice test to identify areas they might be weak in, or if it is a graded test that's going to count towards their course grade. But testing does seem to be more and more a way that students become engaged because they see it as being important, and less engaged with the learning process in sense of reading or watching videos or attending lectures, which we know can be a real challenge as well.
Yeah, definitely. Just to add to that, the case study that I mentioned with Anne Torres, so her marketing class, which was part of this case study, was something like 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. or something. It was in the evening, so a lot of students didn't want to attend it. But once they found out that they would be assessed, unannounced in lectures, it could be week 2, it could be in week 5, the participation rates went, absolutely rose, because students knew they had to attend, and if they didn't attend, they may not get the grade. So that was definitely a way she used kind of participation and formative assessment in order to engage students. Yeah,
there's lots of comments coming in. So James, I think answering to an earlier question I had about the assignments and how quickly he was turning around, and a week's turnaround is certainly fast based upon some of the discussions we've had with customers. Dennis is teaching in the UK, which I suspected he was based on his comments, but saying he was German. So I'm not sure, Dennis, from your experiences of whether you've taught in German or learning in Germany, whether you think that model of testing or over testing is something that's common in Germany as well as in the UK, but certainly seems to be something that seems to be a common thread there. Lots of people talking about using technology in different ways, videos, and videos is something that we hear a lot about. So doing these webinars, either putting stuff up on YouTube or hosting them on the institution's learning management system, so their Moodle or their Blackboard site, as a way to engage students. And I just wondered if anybody had a thought about the length of those videos. So one of the things we heard from somebody who joined the call last week was that they felt that videos that were more than 15 minutes long were too long. And that's something I found interesting. I have quite a lot of experience in working with videos in education, and I would have said 15 is actually far too long, and most students' attention span would stretch to 5 to 6 minutes at the best. So I just wondered if any of you were using videos, whether you chose them based upon their length as well as obviously their content. Okay, so no more questions at the moment, Anna.
So also just to add to what Stuart just said about videos, we recently did a webinar on actually social media for learning. That's been one of the options here, which hasn't been selected really. We also had someone on the call last week that said they used Facebook for their students, and they would upload videos to Facebook and their students would watch them. So, you know, every day now students are using social media, so perhaps you feel that is something that could be used to engage students, but also there is the risk that perhaps it blurs the line between kind of teaching and between a slightly closer relationship where students actually just use social media for social reasons, and it can also risk excluding students who perhaps don't use social media. So it'd be an interesting one if whoever answered that could kind of share their ideas and whether they think it is something that can be effectively used.
Okay, so a couple of people commenting on the learning management systems they're using, LMSs. Sorry for using abbreviations, we will stop doing that, but Moodle being used by James, certainly others in the group seem to be using their learning management system as well. Yeah, use of videos at the start of each semester or presentations, Deborah using Moodle as well. Cool. Should we move on?
Yeah, let's.
Okay, so we're going to put our next poll question up now. Oh, we'll do if I can hit the buttons right. So how do you measure student engagement? Again, multiple choice here, so jump in there. This is far from a definitive list. I think we kind of struggled here with answers because there were so many potential options. So jump in and let us know what you think. If you're going to choose more than one answer, that's fine, and certainly any comments in the chat room would be helpful too. So we'll just give you a moment or two to see what's going. Good question there around whether posting presentations as videos online or potentially not as videos as presentations affects attendance. Really good question, James, and something that often comes up in our discussions.
Definitely. I think what was said last week about that when we had a similar webinar was that a lot of people do post videos, but they don't give students all the content. So they perhaps give a bit of content to learn at home, but students still know that they need to go to the lecture to get all the content that they're going to need for the final exam.
Cool. So it looks like voting is just about stop. So let's share those results with you. Cool. So by far our largest choice is a student attainment and results. Sorry, I can't get my words out today. At 57%, and then some choices around end of course feedback or surveys from the students and their participation and retention rates, which I guess students not dropping out of the course. So yeah, that student attainment and results being by far the biggest choice there, Anna.
Yeah, definitely. And as I mentioned in the case study that we did with Anne Torres, that was definitely the key definer of whether students were engaged. So not only participation, but the fact that the pass rate increased from about 50% to over 90%. So there is this correlation, which is definitely true, that if students are engaged, they're more likely to take control of their own work, be an active learner, and therefore get better grades. So what else do we have there?
So student participation, retention rates, certainly voted by a few.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess that participation piece, I mean, it is a mixture of things. So one of the things that the tools we see commonly used to increase participation, particularly in lectures, which obviously trying to keep the students engaged, are tools like Kahoot or similar kind of survey tools where you can get students either to use a device that's in the lecture hall or their smartphones to answer poll style questions and put them up on the screen. So just wondered, given that student participation did get quite a high vote there, whether anybody's using those kind of tools in their lectures to keep students engaged. So whether it's clickers or software like Kahoot or those similar kind of things to try and get the students involved in the lectures. Also, end of course surveys and feedback. So, whilst this is particularly a UK thing, certainly the National Student Survey is something that's run every year, and certainly institutions will be looking at the results of that kind of survey. So I just wondered whether anybody had an opinion on whether those kinds of surveys, whether they felt they were particularly valuable at that stage, or whether it was, as we've heard before, it was a little bit late to get the opinion at the end rather than in the middle.
Yeah, definitely. And actually there are some universities which instead try and get informal feedback really early on in a module. So for example, one particular class, lecturers have time to remedy any difficulties or anything they might need to change about the module. And definitely speaking from a personal experience, when I was at university, this was definitely something that was done in the UK, but also I attended universities in Spain and Portugal, and that was often used as well to see if we enjoyed the module, if there was anything lecturers could change to make the module more engaging.
Sorry, I was chortling at James's last question. So, is engagement when students ask the tutor about subject material? I guess so, James. You'd like to think that was showing some level of engagement. If it's the week before the end of course and a big test, I guess that raises its own concerns. But that's a good point. Just to grab some stuff that went through in the chat room. On our point about whether providing presentations to students affected attendance, certainly general answer was no, and that students were still attending lectures. Deborah said she'd actually emailed out presentations to students in many cases, and they hadn't even bothered to open their emails. And I do wonder, Deborah, is that about the delivery method? So are students actually using their email accounts and engaging with email? And is that a cultural thing, about a generational thing? Or is it about the fact that they actually have to sit and go through the slides rather than it being a video that they can sit and watch and listen of a presentation? So I'm afraid I don't have any answers there. I know certainly from experience in South Africa, where I work with institutions, the University of Cape Town, for example, they video all of their lectures, but they are done live, and students can only access it afterwards. So whether they certainly don't feel it affects attendance because they've been doing it for several years now, but there's a model where it's not provided beforehand, but they are trying to drive student engagement by making those lectures available after the fact on video as well.
Definitely. I think the Joint Information Systems Committee as well did a survey in higher education. I think it was just in the UK. But when they asked higher education students what they wanted more of, recording lectures was actually one of the most popular things that students wanted. But then it does kind of open up risk that students may not attend the lectures, and it's about getting that balance where students are engaged and also want to attend the lectures.
Sure. And Deborah had just come back and said actually the presentations were videos, and she was emailing the notes, and still students were engaging with them. So
social media, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't know. I don't know how, because I know Deborah, you said that Moodle was used in your institution. Whether it's about email as a tool of delivering information to students, and whether that's just not something they're looking at or engaging with, but it might be an area to look at. I know certainly in my business world and my day-to-day job, and I'm sure for all of you as lecturers, email is not always the easiest way to get a message across. Just kind of going through. So look, lots of good sharing on. So there were some thank yous there and good luck. So clearly some people sharing some good information in the chat room. YouTube, from Dennis, YouTube is very useful. Recording lectures is standard for us now, which is great. But the best road to engagement, in my experience, is small groups and discussions. Digital tools are useful, but I'm not sure they're the most reliable tool for engagement. Thank you for that, Dennis. And you're right. I mean, certainly YouTube's good. That small group work is something we've certainly looked at before, and we've done webinars on, and both as face-to-face pieces, but also digital tools that allow you to create groups of students and have them engage in projects and share information and have discussions through those methods. So, but that small group piece seems to be, I think from webinars, I'd say it's probably one of those pieces that everybody agrees is a great tool. It's been a way to be able to facilitate that, and sometimes the digital route is an easier way to facilitate it, particularly if you have large groups. And I mean, class sizes and group sizes or course sizes vary drastically from the low tens of students and some courses to institutions I work with in South Africa, where there are 2,000-3,000 students, particularly in first year courses. So it's, I guess, finding the right tool that works for you. Yeah,
it's definitely about balance as well. I mean, if you have a large student cohort, perhaps technology is the best way to try and engage all those students. It's also kind of the impact of, if you want to have small group discussions, that is great for different learning styles. It's great for perhaps learners that are more shy, who are less likely to contribute in big lectures, but also it's about time, you know, whether you have time to run 5 sessions instead of 1 as a massive lecture. So that's definitely a challenge, but also is really important. You know, how are students going to feel if they're in a lecture with 400 students and the lecturer doesn't know their name? That's definitely not a way that's going to, you know, engage students. So having those small groups is a really important way to engage students. It's just about whether that is possible, and I think that's something students are now looking to find when they go and look at prospective universities, is the student staff ratio and whether they're going to get that time and that kind of attention that they might need.
Cool. Oh, there was one. So from Dennis, that's the thing about big groups. The best engagement tools don't work well with them. Perhaps digital help is useful for that, but no complete substitute for smaller groups. No, I would completely agree, Dennis. I think that smaller group piece, and certainly face-to-face, seems to be the piece that everybody's looking to achieve and to be able to build into their teaching model. Cool. Do you want to move on?
Sure, I think we have time to do our 4th and final poll question.
Cool, so let's put that up on the screen for you. So, final question, how satisfied are you with the level of student engagement? This is a single choice question, so jump on in there and let us know what you think. Cool, lots of people. And this was a quick one, everybody getting in there. So we'll just give you a moment or two more. Again, feel free to use the chat room.
Definitely.
Thank you for doing that today. You've all been really good and engaging with us, which is fantastic. Cool, so looks like everybody who's answering is going to. So let's put those results up there. So 35% satisfied, and then indifferent and unsatisfied, and below that. But the largest group certainly satisfied with that level of engagement, which is good to hear, and certainly not something I think we would have guaranteed on seeing today?
No, definitely. I mean, student engagement is kind of the latest buzzword. It's been around for a few years, but definitely from our experience, it seems to be something that lecturers are really trying to kind of find out how to do in the best way. But it's really great to see that a lot of you are satisfied with student engagement. And we have seen throughout this webinar, you know, the ways and the techniques that you might do that. And so if there's anything we haven't mentioned, it would be really good to hear from you, because clearly the majority of you are satisfied with what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick comment from James, who said still need to work on it. Absolutely, James. I think as students change, as the type of students change and how they engage with the world around them, there is constantly going to be that challenge at looking at how you engage them, and whether that's with the type of materials you're using, or the tools that you're using, or some of the teaching methodologies. There's a whole load of stuff there, and certainly we've identified some areas that I think we all agree are quite strong today, but always something to work on. Gregor, that is the paradox. Why would you like to attend engagement webinar when you're satisfied with your students' engagement?
Yeah.
Well, I guess as James said, Gregor, there's always there's always something new to learn, and new ideas, and having your peers in the chat room sharing their ideas, I think has been helpful. James said as well. Always room for improvement. Yeah.
Interesting to see, you know, perhaps the different ways you engage students. I think it also really depends on what you're teaching. For example, if you're teaching an assignment-based class, perhaps English or a language or something like that, giving instant feedback is not necessarily an option. So perhaps you need to find other ways that can be used to engage students. Whereas perhaps you're teaching a mathematics module where you use a tool that is able to give instantaneous feedback. So it's perhaps about combining those different ways and finding a balance depending on what subject you're teaching as well.
Yeah, and I think that there's lots of comments going through in the chat room at the moment. Dennis mentioned that he's teaching 200 students at a time, which makes it challenging for driving engagement. And I can completely see how that would be the case. And as I said, I've got quite a lot of experience from working with institutions both in South Africa and in the Middle East, where class sizes can generally be larger than the average in Europe and the Nordic countries and the UK. So there are those challenges, and the types of resources and tools that work in those different places certainly vary from place to place. As I said earlier, I think one of the most successful things I've seen for large scale lectures, by which I mean lectures with over 300 students in some cases, is using tools like Kahoot, and we can provide you with some information about that. It's a free resource, but it's really heavily used to get students engaged and keep them focused on what's going on when they're in a packed lecture hall, and getting their thoughts and ideas, and to capture an idea of where they are in that learning cycle. So things definitely vary when you've got those large groups. I don't think it's necessarily any easier with small groups. I think that there are just different challenges that come from those experiences.
Definitely.
No further comments in the chat room at the moment. And I see we are starting to come up on our time, Anna, so to start to bring things together.
Yeah, definitely. We'll just wrap things up. So thank you so much for your participation today. It's been really great to have such a engaging webinar. So we'll be in touch with you soon. If you do have any questions or anything, please speak to myself or Stuart, and we'd be happy to speak to you. We will be sending out certificates. So if you haven't put your name in the chat room already and would like a certificate for your attendance, please do now, and we will get one of those sent out to you. We're also going to do an infographic this time round with some of the key statistics, some key takeaways from this webinar, which we will send out to you as well. The recording of this will be coming soon, so if you have any colleagues that you think might be interested in seeing this webinar, or if you'd like to watch it back, that will be with you soon. Also, we do have an upcoming webinar next Tuesday and Wednesday, both at 10 a.m. BST, yes?
Yeah.
Which is on the value of insights and analytics. So that's going to be a really interesting webinar. We've never done anything like it before, so please do join that if you're able to. As I said, if you have any more questions, please get in touch. But for now, thank you so much. It's been really great and really good to hear from you all.
Cool. And a big thank you from me. It's been really engaged today. It's great to see so many comments and sharing of ideas, and really positive ideas. So I saw a few thank yous flying through the chat room. So that's been really positive. As Anna said, my email address is up on the screen, so grab that and feel free to reach out to me if you're looking to maybe change how you're delivering your course or assessment or anything about your course, and we can have a discussion about how we may be able to help. And obviously we'll get the recording of this session out. Please try and join us next week. That would be great. Be great to see you. And finally from me, if you have an area that you think we could possibly do a webinar on, so if you have some thoughts on a subject or topic that we could do a webinar on, and if it's something that you'd like to contribute to be part of as well, please just drop me an email. I can share it with the appropriate people, but we're always looking for new ideas and new topics to cover in our webinars. So drop us an email and we can look into that as well. But thank you for your time today. We're going to turn the camera and the microphone off now. We'll leave the chat room open for a little while so you can add any final comments or contact details in there. And hopefully we'll see you at a webinar again soon.